welcome to the First Name Basis podcast. This is the podcast where we're joined by industry leaders, special guests, people in tech, and tribal scale employees to have an authentic but informal conversation. I'm Irina Toy. I'm a product designer here at Tribal Scale, and today I am joined by my amazing design team. Yay! Do you guys want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I can go first. My name's Ailsa Blair, and I'm the design manager here at Tribal Scale.
I'm Iman Faz, and I'm a senior product designer on the team.
I'm Abruz Mezashik. I'm also a senior product designer.
Awesome. Okay, so today for the podcast, we put out a forum for everyone to ask us anything they want to ask us about us as individuals, anything about design, our design process, how we work. So let us dive in to the questions. The first question is, how did you get into design and what made you want to become a designer? Elsa, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. So I was actually working at a tech company here in Toronto called FreshBooks at the time, and I was a technical support specialist. And one day, kind of the creative director came to me and asked if I would be interested in organizing and facilitating some of the UX research, usability tests that they were doing for the design team. So I ended up slowly getting integrated with that design team through UX research, which then led me going back to school before I kind of moved fully into product design from a UX research role.
Awesome. Ebru?
For me, I've kind of always been into art. Like I was a yearbook editor in high school. I was always like volunteering to do posters and whatever graphic design was needed. So I wanted to study architecture at U of G for my degree, but then I kind of realized that it wasn't creative enough for me. And then it was kind of a natural transition into UX because I was so into tech and the art field combined. So I kind of took the leap and I went to BrainStation, did the UX course, did a web dev course, and then just realized that this was kind of the perfect career for me because it combined everything that I wanted to do and everything that I enjoyed.
Awesome. Iman?
So similar to Ebru, I've had a very artsy background. I also studied graphic design in OCAD University, so that was kind of nice. And then when I was about to graduate around thesis year, I started to notice that there was a lot of UX, UI positions opening up. So naturally, I wanted to make sure that I was setting myself up to get a job in that field. For my thesis year, I decided to do a virtual exhibition experience, which was very UX heavy. And then that was really helpful in landing my first job. So that's how I got in.
Cool. For myself, I actually studied business in school. I specialized in consumer behavior, which is essentially a mix of marketing and psychology. And then from there, I worked in marketing for about 5 years. And while I was working at a startup, they asked me to redesign their website for them. I've always really liked like that creative side of marketing. And so, yeah, I put together their Shopify store and helped them redesign their website. And then I think that kind of triggered something in me that I really, really enjoyed it. And I spoke with my friend who's a UX designer, and she encouraged me to take a course on UX design. I actually started at Tribal Scale in the marketing team and then moved my way into product design.
Yeah, we stole you from marketing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's pretty cool how all four of us came from really different backgrounds, and it seems like that's always like a trend in design, is that like everyone kind of falls into it in a different way.
Yeah, I don't think anyone really gets into product design through the same path. It's always kind of stopping off at different places along the way before you jump into product design.
Yeah,
like just sure. The concept of design it's an umbrella term, right? There's so many different branches that you could go into. Like product in itself, we associate with digital products, but it's actually also for real physical products as well. So there's just so much that design can accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the second question is, I know my product needs work, but I'm not sure where to begin. How should I get started?
Wow. Okay. UX research. That's a really heavy one. Like,
Yeah.
I'll just start that. Yeah, UX research I think is always kind of how I will try and start my projects off. So I'll start with that generative research, like going into user interviews or looking at past data of the product, just so that I can understand like the user motivations, needs, goals, because without that information, you're never going to create a truly amazing product for your users because you're not going to know what they want.
Yeah, I think it's really important to like really understand what the problem is or what pain point you're solving for, and it's not just like building an app for the sake of building an app. So I think like definitely that research is definitely where to start.
I was just gonna say, yeah, so I did like freelance design for a couple of years, just kind of as a side hustle while I was figuring out what I wanted to do. And whenever I would approach a client, I would always ask, like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Is it needed? Is there a solution that already exists that we can kind of translate into a digital solution? And then always reach out to your user base, get the user feedback. What are their issues? What are they trying to solve? What are their pain points? And then the next step is always like list of things that inspire you. Create a mood board. What like brands are out there that are related to what you're trying to do? What are they doing well? What are they not doing well? And then usually just take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, products are really complex, right? So as soon as you want to either make an iteration or a change, the first thing you need to do is understand your current state. And that's in all aspects of your product, from the people who are using it, from the designs, from the technical infrastructure, from what your organization's trying to achieve. You want to have a good understanding, especially as a designer, to understand what are the priorities in each field, because now the next solution, the next iteration, or whatever improvements we want to instill needs to achieve those goals. So it's really just taking a step back and not assuming that you know what the problems are, because a lot of the times new things will pop out, and just really invest in that research period.
Yeah, for sure. I guess as a follow-up to that, how can tribal scale kind of help people in that initial phase of starting to solve for a problem? Does anyone want to talk about it?
We all know the answer to this one.
Glad you asked.
It's almost as if we have created something to solve this problem.
So we have introduced discovery design workshops. So a lot of understanding that current state that we were talking about is a discovery practice. It doesn't just end there. There's coming up with that mood board, coming up with good examples in the competition to kind of get inspired by and maybe imitate. And then obviously figuring out how to implement that. But we have put these workshops together at Tribal Scale to kind of help you figure out, you know, what we're trying to achieve, what we're trying to solve for, and just most importantly, where to start. And it's usually just a combination of a bunch of different types of exercises that you can do to help facilitate that discussion, but then also get to a point where we know how to move forward. We've all agreed that this is the core area of our product, or area to innovate, and that's where we can start solving for. So we have these workshops that we have designed to put together to kind of help that conversation going. This is nothing new. We already did this at Tribal Scale. The only thing new about it is that we're now going to have to do it remotely, but I think we are capable of doing that.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, because I think a lot of people right now assume they know how they want to innovate with COVID, whether that be like curbside pickup or, you know, something else like contactless delivery. I still think that these sessions are like really important, despite kind of knowing the area you want to improve, because you don't necessarily know how to achieve that or how to get your user from that first point of frustration to obviously feeling good about the interaction they're having with your app.
Awesome. The third question is, while working on designing an app that already exists in the market, do you make a conscious effort to differentiate from what is already there in the current apps? Like for features that don't have a lot of flexibility, i.e. payment flows, what's your approach in making it different?
I can kind of start that discussion. So I think it's kind of a yes and no question. Yes and no answer, because you don't want to fix something that's not broken. Like, we're not out here just trying to be different for the sake of being different. Like, we all know the favorite button is a star. We're not going to change it to a square just to do something different and edgy. And the fact that there's an existing market is usually a great opportunity to gather insights and data, because it means there's a user base out there and there's feedback out there. So I think for UX, if the UX is kind of established, UI is kind of a great chance to set yourself apart with your branding, like types of illustrations, personalization. And then when it comes to feature specific things like payment, I think Amazon's a great example where we know that it's just a regular payment flow, but they implemented something very unique, which is the one-click buy, which is very specific to their user base. So I think that's kind of a great opportunity to do something a little different within an existing established UX.
Yeah, I think there are definitely little ideations you can make to even those established flows, like Ebru was saying, whether that be like an automatic payment option or, you know, being able to implement Apple Pay or Google Pay. There's always kind of an extra bit of delight that you can bring to your users, I think, no matter what.
Yeah, and like in terms of standing out, there's obviously so many applications that do the same thing. So what is it that's going to get you to actually commit to a product and go back and use it again? And it would just go back to how easy was it for me to accomplish my task? So if I had to buy something online and it took me like 60 clicks and like a lot of information that I had to read, and I had to input my payment information by myself, versus Amazon, which is like a one click buy kind of situation. And it was good for my need and my task, and I was able to accomplish it without feeling uncomfortable or wary about it. That is really what you want to focus on. How can I make this task super easy and assure that it will be accomplished? And then once you really focus on that, you can do the pretty stuff, the UI stuff, the branding stuff. Interaction design is a huge one, like seeing things kind of like bleed in, bleed out. Those are kind of nice like flourishes on top. But the core for design is to be like, okay, you want to buy something, how can I make that as easy as possible for you?
No need to reinvent the wheel if it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, and adopt best practices, right? Like Ever said, if a close icon is an X everywhere, we're not going to introduce something new, because every solution is going to be fairly new to somebody. And so why not introduce it with ways that they already know how they're going to use it, just to help with adoption, limit those learning curves as much as possible. And then if you're really, really adamant about something, test it early and make sure that it is actually working for your users, and it's not just something nice that you did for yourself.
Exactly. Awesome. Okay, so the fourth question for today is, what is the easiest and toughest part of working with engineering? I wonder who sent this in.
It was definitely an engineer. Yeah.
Engineers are great. There's no problems whatsoever.
Yeah, they're awesome.
I think we're biased, because our engineers are so easy to get along with, and
that's
they get UX very well. Yeah, I think we're very lucky here at Tribal Scale.
Yeah, and we also, like, I think at Tribal Scale, we are a very collaborative culture. And so, like, it's not just within your own teams that you're collaborating with. We, like, have started sitting as project teams a lot of the time. So, like, often I'll be sitting, like, beside a dev that's working on my designs, and it's just that much easier for them to, like, do their job, because they can just ask me directly. Yeah, I think that's, like, one of the easiest parts is, like, collaboration with them.
I think it's also super important that we both kind of learn to speak each other's language, and I think we get to do that with the tools we use, like Figma. They can see everything we're doing with design and like how the design aspect works, and then we can actually see what the coding is for the different elements that we're designing, and we can kind of communicate to them, like, if we're changing this design, then this is growing by this many pixels, and they know exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think the way that we kind of approach design in general, and the fact that we use Figma as a tool that produces that code for components for them, is super helpful. But as well, the way that we have created design systems for a lot of our projects has also made it a lot easier for the devs to have that consistency across the app and to make things a little bit easier for them to implement as well.
Yeah, what I find really challenging sometimes, but I think we handle it really nicely at Tribal Scale, is the fact that if there is a technical restriction, our engineers explain to us why that's a restriction. It's not enough to just be like, we can't do that and you need to come up with another design, but understanding what that restriction is, how flexible it is, why is this restriction more flexible than that one, kind of gives us a better understanding of how to improve UX and how to improve UI. Why is this UI so complex? Why is it going to take you forever? It's so simple. It's a line kind of
Right.
thing.
And just building off of that, I think like involving your engineers early on in the process has helped us a lot with making sure things are technically feasible. We're not just designing for the sake of like looking pretty or whatever. I think like it's important for us to have those engineers like work with us during those like ideation phases and really like help us with that technical feasibility.
Yeah, the sooner we understand what's happening, the better, the more accurate our design iterations become, and we're not going in circles creating things that just would never be feasible in the first place. And I also think like engineer mindset and a design mindset, they can be very different. I mean, if you think about it, like in theory, we use different sides of our brains, which is controversial, but that's fine. But the idea is that we're actually both very creative, right? Like engineers, developers, they're doing what we're doing with just a different language and a different medium. And what we do is it's a lot more visual, but we're both trying to solve the same problem. So we're both being creative. We're both trying to figure out how to make this the best solution possible. But again, learning each other's languages, being involved throughout the entire cycle, it will be a lot more efficient for sure.
Yeah, I think building off of what you said. Sorry, Elsa.
Go ahead, Ebru.
Just what you said about how we get the engineers kind of explain to us the restraints. We do the exact same thing in return. Like we explain our design choices with data and backing it up with reasoning, and then we can kind of meet in the middle and create a solution that's feasible and desirable for everybody.
Yeah, I think also having the engineers involved in a lot of our design reviews and critiques throughout the entire project helps as well. So they always know where we're at in terms of design and what decisions have been made, like Ebru said, based on the data and results of the research that we have.
Yeah, there's so much benefit in having them in those design critiques. Because sometimes, like, I think us as designers, we think a lot alike. And so when we do design critiques with the four of us, we're like, oh, that looks so awesome. We're like, it's just so good. And then having an outside perspective or an engineer's perspective is really helpful. Sometimes they're harsh, eh?
Yeah. It's like a reality
It's
check.
good. It's tough love. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's possible. Come on.
Yeah.
I am curious to know what engineers think is challenging about designers. So
yeah. Maybe we challenge them to film their podcast.
Yeah.
And we'll ask them the same question.
Yeah. I bet the response would be design QA when you're telling me to move everything 3 pixels.
Yeah, that's been me this week. I'm like, please move this 4 pixels to the left.
Hey, that stuff matters. That's polish and amateur. So
yeah,
it's very important. We're sorry about the pixel pushing.
Yeah, or it's like increase this font size by 1 point. Oh goodness. Okay. Another question that we've gotten is how do design practices change in an agile environment?
That's a good question. I don't know that I've ever not worked in an agile environment in tech, so I don't know that I could really speak to working in waterfall or anything else at this point, but I think the benefit of being agile in general is just being able to make those constant iterations. You know, being able to, if you're working on a product full time, being able to go back and make those little delight moments a little more inspiring, a little more, creative, can make the world of difference when you're working on a product full time. Unfortunately, we don't get that benefit because as an agency, we obviously kind of work on a product and hand them over to the client. But it still helps us work, I think, in a really meaningful way with the rest of our project team, which I think is the most important thing for me.
Yeah, it is a point to be careful about iterations, because it's very easy to create like 50 versions of something. It may not be as time consuming, but it is, I would say, misuse of a resource. Your designers could be helping with your product a lot better if they're not making every iteration that just pops up into your head. So I think part of being agile is also leveraging your designers in a, like, having rational requirements. So a lot of the time something will pop up and you think you kind of have the idea, you hand it off to your designer and you create versions for it. And a lot of times iterations can become inaccurate. It's because those requirements are not clearly identified, or all the scenarios are not really figured out as much. So I would say that's probably the big part, is like being agile for design, especially, is like have your requirements figured out nicely and clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like process is still really important in an agile environment.
Yeah.
There's still, and especially for design. Yeah, especially for design, like it's definitely not a linear process. Like it's kind of like a circle, like always goes back and forth. You always have to drop off and test and come back. And especially with something like unexpected coming out, it could be like a business rule that changes, or like something like COVID hitting out of nowhere that you didn't plan for. So you have to just adapt and pivot.
Yeah.
Right. At Tribal Scale, we have like a visual diagram of our agile experience, and it's a circle. It's like that iteration process, right? And I think like something we just talked about was design critiques, and being able to make sure that you integrate design critiques throughout your process and like repeat every time you make iterations. You're not just like making iterations out of the blue, right?
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I love our design critiques. I feel like, so basically a design critique, maybe we should explain, is really just when you imagine if you were to get any kind of ask to create a screen or a web page, you could come up with so many different versions, even if those requirements are super clear and it's like, it's not as exploratory as you would want. As a designer, you can create a lot of versions even with restrictions. And so it's nice to kind of share it with our team, and we kind of just like nitpick at what works, what doesn't work. And that really helps us justify the decisions that we've made. It's not just because it looks good, but it actually needs to match a need. And the fact that we get to do those critiques, not only do our designs get better, but then we're also able to speak about our work a lot better as well.
Yeah, I think for us, involving the client in those critiques as well as engineering means that we're always kind of creating something that is truly going to be a good experience once we're done with it, right?
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to throw in another question that was asked. Where do animations belong in UX?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Animations belong in UX, like in the process of creating a product, or I don't really get the question.
Maybe that's not a good question.
I think there are two ways to answer that question, right? Which is, you know, how do we kind of create, and when do we create animations? And for me, it's always at the end of a project, because animations are not necessarily an absolute need for the app. If I'm creating an MVP, I don't need to think about all of those micro interactions and animations right off the bat. They're more of a second iteration kind of delight that you can bring to your users, I think. And they are very good at giving visual cues on how to tell the user to do something, or to reward them for getting something right, or to let them know how to amend something if there's an error, for instance. So they definitely have their place, right?
I think they're kind of like the cherry on top, exactly like you said. It can be used to like bridge a gap between two states. Like if you like submit a response and then that button turns into a check mark, like that's saving you two screens in that one single interaction. But that usually always comes after the mockups have been done.
Those are usually those moments that kind of make it stand out from other apps as well, right? Like that nice action, that nice bleed. But I do want to also mention that a lot of time there's a lot of design work that's conceptual and not always implementation heavy. And if you're doing conceptual work that's more for storytelling or unlocking budgets or pitches, things like that, then I would say the animations and interactions become a higher priority, because they're that really nice cherry on top. They really kind of wow people when they're watching it. It helps with storytelling, especially if you're trying to walk through an entire complex flow. And it's really good for inspiration too. So on the conceptual side, I would say it's a bit more important. And then on the implementation side, if you have a good process, then yeah, it would come a little later in the delivery.
Yeah, I think also if you have good engineers like we do, they kind of already know how things should be behaving. Like if I click into a text box, like the label should move up like in a nice swoopy motion.
Yeah, it's not just design. Like our engineers are always showing us interactions without us even thinking of it. So
yeah, so we're very lucky.
Nice. Yeah, it's nice to see that.
Okay. The next question is, who or what is your biggest creative inspiration and why?
I feel like I have so many.
I know, there's so many.
How to name.
Yeah.
I feel like for me, I grew up in Liverpool in the UK, and when I was growing up, there was a lot of Banksy artwork around the city. So I would walk around and kind of check it all out. And I think that and probably graphic novels were the first like creative thing that I almost like attached myself to and started enjoying during my childhood. Yeah, which probably somewhat led me to my path to design, I guess.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think for me it's a lot of like art and art history as well. I majored in art history along with architecture, so that's kind of always been my inspiration. Like pop art movement, like Picasso is my favorite artist, and I'm really into like the old-timey cartoons, like old Disney styles, which you guys can probably tell from my illustration style. They're like those funky looking guys.
Yeah, art history is a really good one because there's so much evolution in art. And I know that art's separate from design, but creativity wise, it's really, really heavy. So I also studied art history and I enjoyed it. I loved it so much. I think another medium, it's not really a creative person, but another medium for me would be film, movies and TV shows, and also like, what are they called? Opening and closing sequences. So those are really fun. We've seen them also evolve throughout time. And like, it's just really fun to see aesthetically, but also through storytelling, how people can really like bring out raw emotion. And with design and even product design, like we're working with people at the end of the day. We're working with their behaviors and habits. And I think film also does that really well. It can really draw on you getting scared or feeling sad kind of stuff. So I think that's also really fun to see.
Yeah, I grew up watching a lot of the James Bond movies, and those opening sequences are just so good.
I think another medium that's been quite inspirational is architecture. Especially for me, I think cathedral ceilings for some reason have always been like really inspiring to me, and just like the intricacies in all of it, and like the geometry of it too is like really, really beautiful. I also think that we are very lucky to be in a time where social media is like so prevalent in all of our design crews, and like we're able to share what we are designing and also draw inspiration from other designers from like all around the world, like whether it's through Dribbble or Instagram or whatever. Yeah, I know we're always sharing Dribbble shots with one another of like, just like, check this out, it's so cool. Yeah. And also just being able to connect with like, whether it's past designers that you worked with or people in Toronto or globally, like it's cool to see what everyone's working on.
Yeah, especially since like, as we said, everyone has like a different background because it's such a huge field. So everyone's style is different, everyone's creativity is different, and it's like, it's very inspiring. And then it's also kind of scary because then you think, oh, I'm not good enough, which is like very normal. Yeah. But you know, you want to try to be positive about it and get inspired, not intimidated.
Yeah. Yeah, good old imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Okay, the last question is a really serious one.
Oh no.
Yeah. What's the most aesthetically pleasing kind of pie? Who submitted this?
Aesthetically, I have a feeling I know who that is.
We have a couple guesses.
Yeah.
Okay. Aesthetically pleasing pie. So like what it looks like.
Yeah. I feel like a classic apple pie with like the lattice top, like the cross.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that is like, it's just so like, when I think of pie, I think of that pie.
That's a good
For
one.
me, I think that's it. For aesthetically pleasing pie.
That's a good one. Classic.
Yeah, I love a good key lime pie or a lemon meringue pie, something that has like some kind of whip or meringue on top.
Yeah,
Just
the
like...
layering when you cut into it, it's like, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. I would say meringue pie. They're so pretty.
Yeah. And like the brightness of the color.
Yeah.
Or like a good meat pie, like a shepherd's pie with the layers.
Yeah.
You can think of different types of pie.
Pizza pie. I'm going with
pie.
my pizza pie.
Yeah.
Pizza pie wins.
Anyways, on that note, those are some of the questions that we got. I think there are a few more questions, so maybe we'll have to do a round 2 of this one day. Thanks for listening to the First Name Basis podcast. You can listen on Apple, Spotify, or watch us on YouTube. Elsa, do you want to just quickly end off with how they can find more information about our design team?
Yeah, so you can head to the Tribal Scale website at tribalscale.com. You can also check out all of our social media. We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, the usual dribble, obviously, for design. And I would also suggest if you're looking to innovate right now, if your business potentially needs to innovate right now because of the COVID situation, or even post-COVID, check out the Tribal Scale design workshops. We're providing the first one for free so we can help you figure out those needs and goals and motivations of your users. And yeah, we just want to make sure that these businesses survive and that we're there to help them.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for listening.